1, Vayikra. We begin the sugya, the section that relates to korbanot, to sacrifices. We have, the reality is that we have a level of difficulty when we approach this text. We relate very well to the narrative of our ancestors when we deal with the kindness of Avram, the challenges of Yitzchak, the journeys of Yaakov, our ancestors in Egypt, the stories that relate around their travels in the wilderness. But now we enter into a portion that relates strictly to the sacrifices, to the korbanot, to the ritual service that took place in the Mishkan and eventually into the Bet HaMikdash. So we have a level of difficulty for a few reasons. Number one, it's very detailed. In other words, it tells you what sections of the animal is placed on the altar. So you have to somehow find inspiration by appreciating the fact which tails are burnt and which ones are not. And number two, we live in an era that sacrifices are not in, they're out. So how do we develop an appreciation of reading a text written or addressing a world when such services were part of the norm? So that's something that we have to deal with. But what's important to remember is the fact that we place a tremendous and great significance in the details themselves. You know, we have a religious system that focuses on practice. You have to know, you have to observe the Shabbat, you have to know how to observe the Shabbat. So how do you figure out how to observe the Shabbat? You can't just close your eyes and meditate. There has to be some kind of system that guides you. So there's a halachic system. There's texts you turn to. Shulchan Aruch, Talmud, Rambam. Well, you study the text to be able to practice your Judaism. So on the surface, you would only view the text or the studying as a mean to go ahead and achieve the purpose of the religion. But the religion tells you, the Torah tells you, no. Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. There's a tremendous value to go ahead and just study. Now, it has to be studying for the purpose of committing your life to it. You can't just study it and then ignore it. But the study of Torah is extremely significant. And then we are told that you should know the study of Torah benefits the soul, and even if you study that which is not relevant today, even if you learn totally for the sake of heaven, just for the sake of studying, that too is considered a tremendous mitzvah. And therefore, this section of korbanot, to go ahead and study it in detail, what happens when you spill the blood, what happens when I was thinking some bad intention of eating some of the meat after its designated time, and I only thought it at the time that I was slaughtering only halfway through the neck, but then I changed my mind. A very detailed discussion. So this is analyzed in depth in the Talmud, and there are people in this generation, I'm sure even today, that are studying it. Is this considered Torah for the sake of practicing it? No, because, well, they hope, indeed, to merit to see a Bet HaMikdash, but even if they don't, there is something achieved with the study itself, and it seems to be that there is a tradition that if you specifically relate to the korbanot, this Talmud Torah of korbanot is extremely valuable. So with that information in mind, we're going to go ahead and enter into this section, and we're going to read the first few verses, and then focus on a specific verse which will provide for us a difficulty, and we can move from there. So Moshe, verse 1, Moshe is called from the tent of meeting. Verse 2, Daber el bnei Israel. Speak to the children of Israel when a person among you would want to bring an offering. Well, it could be from animal, cattle, flock. And verse 3 begins with the olah, a burnt offering. Verse 3, if you bring a burnt offering, the olah, be sure it's an unblemished male. Many argue there's no such thing, right? And you should go ahead and bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting. Be more careful than I say now. Male-dominated bookshelf. Verse 4, you go ahead and place your hands over the offering. It should be slaughtered. Verse 5, so far so good. Verse 6, you skin the animal. This is all in the Torah. Now, focus please on verse 7 through verse 8. V'natnu bnei Aaron hakohen esh ala mizbeach. The sons of Aaron should go ahead and arrange a fire. Now, and arrange wood on the fire. So I walk away from verse 7 with the following. I know very well that there's an altar, copper altar. I know that on top of the altar there is a fire, and on top of the fire you have etzim. So far so good? I'm aware. Verse 8. The children of Aaron, the sons of Aaron, the Kohanim, they should do what? Archu. Arrange what? The pieces of the animal. The head with some fat, with the fats that covers the slaughtered area. And where is it placed? On the wood. Now, stop there. Where is the wood? Do you remember verse 7? And where's the fire? Where is the fire? On top of the Mizbeach. But the Torah was concerned that by the time you reached verse 8, you forgot verse 7. So the Torah tells us again that you should know that these sections, these pieces, are placed on the wood, that is on the fire, that is on the altar. I know it already, right? What am I being? What's the significance? And if you think that this is the only place, when the next section, the next paragraph, deals with elevated offerings from sheep and goats. So if you look, turn the page and turn to verse 12. What do you get, Baal Torah? Same thing, verse 12. Okay? So in verse 12 we are told, go ahead, cut it into pieces. Okay? Head, fat. The Kohen should arrange them on the wood, that is on the fire. Al ha'etzim, asher al ha'esh, asher al ha'mizbeach. Okay, I know that already. I could have figured it out twice, but the Torah feels that it's extremely important to be mindful of the fact that when you bring an offering, it should be on wood that is on a fire, that is on the altar. So what's the significance of these statements repeated over and over again in this section? Now, let's return to the idea of korbanot themselves. Why? Question. Why does the Almighty want the nation of Israel to bring sacrifices? Okay, so to show appreciation, right? Bring tofu, right? Veggie burger. I can think of other things that are more beneficial. Does the Kohen really need all that, the meat, steaks? Okay, so comes the Rambam. And the Rambam writes that you should know the way korbanot were established and the reason they were established is that the Ribono Shel Olam understood very well that he's giving this text, this moral book, this code of ethics, to a human. Humans have human tendencies, and therefore this is a book addressed to humans. You know the story, Moshe Rabbeinu comes up to heaven, and he meets an angel, and the angel asks him, what are you doing here? We don't expect humans up here. And the Talmud shares with us that Moshe responds that he's here to get the Torah. And they go into panic mode, the angels. They know that this text, this concept called Torah is beloved. Why is it being given to a human? The angels wonder. The Ribono Shel Olam tells Moshe Rabbeinu, go ahead, respond to them. He grabs onto the throne of the Almighty for protection, and he responds, let me ask you a question. What does the text say? To go ahead and not steal, not kill. Do you angels have jealousy? Not to go ahead and lust. The other woman. Do you angels struggle with that issue? So obviously, it is a text that is designed for the human. That's what the beautiful message there. What's the idea behind it, of course? Torah was given to humans with an understanding that we are humans. There are rabbinic statements. The Torah, lo nitna Torah lo malache hashars. Torah was not given to angels. So don't go crazy. You are a Kohen. You work in the temple. You have the vestments. You're wearing the vestments. You finish service. You were taught as a young child that you are only to wear those vestments, those clothes, while you are involved in service, and you are not to derive benefit afterwards. So they finish the service, and the Kohen is panicking because I'm no longer performing the service, and I am enjoying these clothes. So he runs, and he gets all upset, and he turns to an older Kohen, and he says, what am I supposed to do? For about 15 seconds, I was wearing a garment, and I was not involved in service, and he's in panic mode, and he wants some volume, he wants some something to calm him down. The older Kohen says to him, worry not. Torah was not given to angels. It was given to humans. And as a human, it takes time to get dressed and undressed. It takes time. Calm down. God recognizes the human condition. He's actually extremely involved with the making of the human condition. And that's why we shouldn't be too hard on ourselves. In other words, if we failed yesterday, I don't have to be down on myself today. I have to go ahead and maximize what I could do today. Because I happen to be a human. So therefore, I have the ability to renew. You know, with the exciting period we enter during Pesach really begins this Shabbos. Why does it begin this Shabbos? Rosh Chodesh Nisan, Chodesh Hazeh Lachem. It's a chiddush. It's a renewal. The idea that we could renew. Why? Humans often are burdened by what yesterday did, or what I said yesterday, or what I could have accomplished yesterday. And it was one of the worst things that we deal with, that we have expectations and we fool ourselves to believe that God has these great expectations from us that are supernatural. The reality is Torah was given to humans, a very important part of Jewish tradition. Now, human nature, during the period that this journey in the wilderness is taking place, human nature was such, they wanted to connect to some kind of spiritual force. They were in tune with the idea. They were quite in tune with the idea that there is a realm beyond the physical world. It is something that still exists. People are searching. You know, Israeli soldiers, what do they do when they finish the army? They go to India. Why? They are searching, right? They are searching. Some of them, are always shocked when they return and they discover something within Judaism. It amazes them that they had to travel so far when 2 blocks down the street they could have found so many answers. They're boggled. But they go, we are searching. Humans are searching. A lot of the music today is music that indicates that people are searching for some kind of meaning. They want to connect to some kind of culture that believes in things. They visit Africa. The world is indeed, humans are searching. And that was in existence in that generation. And, according to the Rambam, the human, satisfied that desire to connect to something spiritual was by bringing a life to that higher being that they worshipped, provide for him a life. So, idea in a pagan culture, lechatchila, ideally, what kind of life would you offer to satisfy that God, that force? So ideally a human. The human does the best. In other words, if you want to be a machmir, the mahadrim in a mahadrin, if you are a real pagan, you go ahead, you take the virgin, you burn her on the altar, and the Incas, you go to the Mayan, to the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, you go to the pyramids there, and these cultures, which today are appreciated and studied, were indeed, human sacrifice was in. It was in. Bedieved, in other words, if you would go to a more lenient posek in that society, and he would say, no, you could also satisfy the pagan force that we worship, whatever the God is, with a sacrifice. And that was human nature. It was a desire. It was an urge.
Is that why we have Akedas Yitzchak to show that we don't do that?
Well, Akedas Yitzchak is really a problem. And therefore the Ribbono Shel Olam states that Lo Elo Alibi, I never had that in mind. That is not what I want. It was willing to show the level of commitment. In other words, that don't turn to Avraham Avinu and say, listen, he was committed, but even he was committed to the truth. But the pagans who are committed to some kind of bluff are more committed to their bluff than he was committed to the truth. And that we prove that it's not the case. But it's not something the Ribbono Shel Olam ever wanted. No way. And there are statements in the Tanakh, that the Lo Elo Alibi, it's something that I never dreamt of. Now, if this text is given to the human, and with an understanding of the human condition, writes the Rambam, and they have this urge to go ahead and bring sacrifices, so what the Torah does is the following. It tells the human, listen, you want to bring a sacrifice? I'm going to give you the guidelines how to do it. Now, by following the letter of the law, you are suddenly doing it because I commanded you to do so. So now you are connected to me. But I'm going to go ahead and establish guidelines that, number one, within the guidelines themselves, you could learn the true values of Judaism. Within the guidelines, for example, the Torah tells us that if you go ahead and bring a bird, remove the crop. Don't bring the intestines of the bird onto the altar. The feathers, you could, even though there's a nasty odor that will be produced from them, but not the stomach. Why? Write the rabbis, and this is again a tradition that dates back to Moshe and Sinai, that of nizon min hagezel, chickens or birds eat anything or anywhere. They're like the Torontonian raccoons, that they find their way, from what I understand, that when the city hall voted to bring those green boxes, there were a bunch of raccoons dressed as council members. But in any event, the birds, machzach hamish, the birds eat anywhere. Aha! So they don't eat only from what was given to them. They steal the birds. That should not be on my altar. So comes a person to the temple in Yerushalayim, the Beis Hamikdash, brings a bird. He sees the Kohen throwing away the crop, and the Kohen explains to him, if this entity does not eat from what's designated from, it takes from others, you cannot serve God by taking from others. So the message is you walk away with value. So here we have it. So purpose number one of Korbanot is to go ahead and give them a location where they serve, where they are taught at the same time values. And by the way, the Temple Mount, the Har HaBayis in Yerushalayim, did not just have a temple for service. It had as well a Sanhedrin, where they taught the law. You come to Yerushalayim, you didn't just bring a korban and walk home. You brought a korban, but you saw people that were ethical. You saw values. You learned from the teachings. You learned how to treat others. So that's what Judaism is about, according to the Rambam, to deal with the human condition, but it's not the ideal. It became the ideal. In other words, korbanot, the system, became an ideal after the Torah was given. Do you see the idea? It's not that in itself has intrinsic value. It has extrinsic value. It is value based on the fact that the Ribbono Shel Olam commanded us to do it in a very specific way. That's the Rambam. Nachmanides is uncomfortable. Yes?
Just a quick question. So if we follow the Rambam's way of thinking, if the Torah were given today, would the whole Parshas, will the whole Vayikra be absent from the Torah? Because we don't have Korbanos today. I mean, the Goyim also generally don't.
You see, if I would answer it by saying, yes, if the Torah be given today, it won't be there. So we would, God forbid, walk away with a feeling that it's less significant. So therefore, the way I would answer it is, perhaps you could say that. However, let's remember one important thing. Once the Ribbono Shel Olam felt that the ideal time to give the Torah was that generation. And in that generation, they did have such urges and desires. And that became part of Torah. Now it became the ideal. So you are right with your assessment that it was based on the human condition and human desire of that time and human nature and tendencies. But nevertheless, I want to emphasize how significant it remains even nowadays when the practice is no longer relevant. So I'm just trying to work around your statement, as you could tell. That yes, perhaps, but at the same time, let's retain the significance. Rav Kook had a philosophy about this, that there are going to be stages of redemption, that when the Mashiach comes, there will be korbanot. But then we will graduate. He has this approach that eventually we will reach a level where it's no longer necessary. So this is a little bit of his approach to the issue. But the traditional, I'm going to make the traditional statement and understanding is that when we daven for korbanos in Musaf, we still believe in it. In other words, it is still part of our system, and it's something we hope for. It's something we hope for. Fine? Yeah.
So if Mashiach comes tomorrow, then there will be a korban pesach this year.
Yes, we are. Yeah, there is still, in other words, we are believing. And I really do believe that it's important to emphasize that we still value it. Now, again, we take Rambam's approach, we have to like shtup it a little bit. In other words, we have to value it because the Torah was given at a time, but we must do so. It's very, very dangerous to walk away believing that Mashiach comes, there won't be korbanot, because adjustments have been made in prayers by some with such a philosophy, and you are entering into a zone that we will try very hard to avoid. Now, Nachmanides' approach. Nachmanides is not taking the rational approach. He's taking the approach that you should know. The way a spiritual system works is like a computer. In other words, the same way, I have absolutely no idea why when I press a delete button, things are deleted. But I know to avoid it because I will indeed delete a file that I worked for 2 hours for. How does it work exactly within the system of the computer? Ich weiß gar nicht, I don't know. But I believe that the system works. So too in the spiritual realm, there are things that work. It's like somehow by me bringing a sacrifice and shechting it and having intentions in the spiritual realm, things are affected. It makes the spiritual realm better. It makes the world a better place. And then there's a trickle-down effect that the physical world becomes better. Very spiritual, and I would call it one that is not really rational, but we believe in the irrational. That's Nachmanides' approach. He asks questions on the Rambam. Authorities defend the Rambam. But these are the two things we take in mind as we enter into this section. Now, the reality is that these two schools are really part of Judaism and rabbinic tradition for generations upon generations. When I go ahead and practice my Judaism, when I do mitzvot, what is the main goal of the mitzvah? Is the main goal to relate to the higher being, to relate to the Ribono Shel Olam, and then I can learn the values of v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, be concerned for the welfare of those in need. In other words, do I walk into my relationship with God with an understanding that the main thing is my sensitivity to the humans in the picture? Or do I walk into the system of spirituality with the belief that I need to press those buttons in the spiritual realm? And therefore my life is going to be to only press buttons that make the spiritual realm work. So therefore I wake up in the morning, and the first thing is I daven, because I know very well that that presses the right buttons, and then I can continue my day because I press the right button. I have satisfied the God above. These are two different approaches. And within the Judaism that we practice, you'll see a blend of the two. In some communities, you'll see much, much more of a focus with getting it done, pressing the buttons. And then in some communities, you'll see the emphasis is more on the fact of menschlichkeit, of being a good human. The Torah is there to remind you to be a good human. So many of these mitzvot that we talk about, and I would say that there is a danger on both ends. There's a tremendous danger on both ends. If all of Torah becomes pressing buttons, if all of my Judaism becomes that I want to go ahead and push those buttons to satisfy the Ribono Shel Olam, I will ignore the world around me, and I will look like a total fool. You get onto an El Al plane. This is a story that happened a few weeks ago. I'm traveling from Ben Gurion to JFK, very unique flight. So there's a Hasidic Jew across the aisle, and the Hasidic Jew probably does not interact with the world around him in Mea Shearim and not in Williamsburg. He's either from or there's no big difference between the two. So he's on the plane and he wants to go ahead and study some text, but he wants to take off his shoes to be comfortable. So he grabs a bag and he puts a bag on his hands, and he's trying to take off his shoelace, not to touch his shoe, because when you touch your shoe, you're supposed to technically wash your hands ideally, and he doesn't want to get up and wash his hands because the seatbelt, which is good, that he doesn't want to get up, which is better than others. So he goes ahead and he takes off his shoelace with a bag on his hands. Now try it if you're ever bored. It's not so easy, I learned from him. And it was a little bit entertaining. Now, to someone from the out, for me it was interesting, and I don't mind it. I mean, I see a guy that's really committed to his spirituality, and I have a lot to learn from him. But to the woman sitting in front of me, who never saw it, you see, these eyeballs growing, and I hope she was not a journalist, because she would have a good article, and it is a challenge. So what world does he come from? He comes from a world that it is a system. In other words, I want to study Torah. The world around me doesn't exist. I could ignore the world around me. I can ignore because I'm here to press those buttons. Others come from a society with the sensitivity that, listen, if it would look odd, it is something that I should avoid or try to find a leniency or touch my shoes. And then when no one's looking, I rub it on my garment or something, and I can rely on those, that say it's okay. It's a very different world. Why? One is a world of pressing the system. One is the other human. This is a religion that focuses on unity, on being sensitive. People talk about the Musar movement. The Musar movement had that insight, that chiddush, that you have to bring into the Lithuanian yeshiva world the sensitivity of the world on the outside. In other words, don't allow the religion to go ahead and just be a system, because then in some ways you can become even pagan. In other words, if all my faith is to go ahead and satisfy and push buttons above, so I'm going to ignore the world around me, I'm not going to act like a mensch, I'm not going to be honest with others, because all my goal is to push those buttons, the result could be very damaging. So the Musar movement, Rabbi Yisrael Salant, was very big onto sensitivity towards others. For example, there was a shtibel. People were davening. A person comes in late, so he wants to daven, and Shemon Esrei started already. And ideally, you're supposed to start your Shemon Esrei, your 18 blessings, right when everyone else. So he starts right by the door. But by blocking the door, the airflow into the room was limited. And over time, it has an effect. So Rabbi Yisrael Salant walks over to him. And he says to him, you're supposed to walk now, he says to him, during your Shemon Esrei, and move away from the doorway. I mean, to go ahead and in the yeshiva world, turn to someone and say, halachically, you are to walk during your Shemon Esrei. I mean, they've been taught that a serpent could be on your foot and you don't walk and you don't interrupt your Shemon Esrei. But Rabbi Yisrael Salant had that understanding that the essence of a religion is to go ahead and have the sensitivity, deal with the other human. The Musar movement, there was a to-do in Europe that yeshiva students would travel from town to town on train, and they would speak and learning on the way. And when you speak and learning, if you visit a Sia-based marriage, it's very active, it's animated. For someone on the outside, it looks very foreign. So the teachers of the, Cheskel Sarna, one of the great Baal Musar, noted that it's probably not ideal to speak and learning in the animated way when you're on the train because of others around you. And this was a shocking statement. But that was a world. In other words, what Musar really brought was into the picture the idea that don't just focus on the spiritual realm, use the rational world around you. And there's a whole list of different insights I could give you from the Musar movement. They rejected the miracles. They didn't like sharing stories about miracles. They say that even Yaakov Kamenetsky, who was probably the last one of that school, maybe his son Reb Shmuel is, that he would not teach his kids, when he would tell them Maisalach about great Gedolei Israel, he would never share with them anything that's supernatural. Every story that he would share about great rabbinic authorities was their ability to overcome their nature, their ability to do for others, right? That was their story. And sometimes there are stories that are corrupted, unfortunately, from these great Musar people, because people don't really relate to it. I'll give you an example. My great uncle, Rabbi Yitzchak Kolitz, he was a chief rabbi Shlomo, and again from a disciple of the Musar schools. So he got once upset, they say. Once. Why? Because someone shared in public a story and they corrupted the story. What was the story? There was a great rabbi who was walking home, great rabbinic, one of the Gdolim, walking home, and he, as he was going to walk into home, he heard the woman who was there cleaning, she was singing. So what he did was he ran away. He didn't want to hear her sing. That's how the story goes. So some great rabbi gets up and uses this story to teach how you have to be so careful with your practice of Judaism that if you ever hear a woman sing, you have to run. So my uncle gets upset. Why? He says the whole story has been corrupted. The story is that he came home and she was singing, and as he was going to enter, he realized that if he would pop in and she would see that he walked in and heard her singing, she would feel uncomfortable. And he said to himself, wait a second. They said about Rabbi Zalman Meltzer, if I'm not mistaken. If she sees me, she's going to feel awful. I'm not going to make a human feel awful. So he ran away because he was sensitive to her feelings. He says, that's the story. Why are you corrupting it? And again, so these are different worlds. Is it a world where there is the human condition, deal with humans? And of course, you could tie this back to Shammai and Hillel. When Shammai goes ahead and talks about, the idea of the realm of spirituality. For example, when you have on a holiday the obligation to bring two types of sacrifices, a korban chagiga and re'iyah. Every time you come on a holiday, you have to bring them. So the re'iyah and olah, it's all burnt, all up to heaven. The Chagigah is one that the human, walks away with a portion. So there's a dispute in the Mishnah, which one should be higher priced? Shammai says that the one that is all burnt should be of a higher value because, of course, that's what Judaism is about, satisfying God. The human, let the human eat a cheaper cut. Hillel says, no, the reverse is the correct approach. That the Chagigah, the Shlomim, the one that is eaten by the humans, that should have a higher value because that's what Judaism is about. V'hafta l'orecha kamocha. Hevem et talmidav shel Aharon, oev shalom, rodev shalom. That's what the religion is all about. Indeed, there's a system. There's no question. Because when there are only ethics without a connection to Torah or spirituality, we see very well what European ethics are about. What's the woman Kutcher, the representative of the EU, after the terrible event that occurred 2 days ago? Ashton. So Ashton, after the shooting that occurs, and this is this animal who aims at humans and as kids. So she goes ahead and says, yeah, they're suffering everywhere. They're suffering in Gaza as well. Where does that come from? I mean, this is European ethics. It's all the same. What's the difference? You explain to me. Here are humans there. There are humans suffering. That's what happens when you have the Western ethics, and what Europe could produce is ethics and wars. That's, as we know very well. But there is a need for the spirituality, and God forbid to only read the text as an ethical text that is relative to every generation. We must be bound by it, but at the same time, realize the essence of it. Now, there's a balance, and I think we are blessed to have the ability to learn from everyone, to learn from my committed planemate, because even though I may not have that way of life, but I see commitment, and to learn from people that are extremely sensitive to others. And if I bring them all together, I could perhaps enhance my Judaism. Now, with it, the danger of you walking into the temple. Now think about it. You're walking into the Beis HaMikdash. You have a business at home. You are a corrupt individual. You cheat your clients. And you come to the Beit HaMikdash, and there's some guilt because we are humans. You come to the Beit HaMikdash, you bring the sacrifice, the Kohen doesn't know you very well, and he says, now you could go home, you have been atoned. He runs home and he continues his practice. The result could be that the korbanot can actually assist you in living a corrupt life. There's a great danger with bringing a korban, and therefore the Nevi'im is crying out, Lama li rov zivchachem? I don't need that. This is not what it's all about. My brother, my younger brother, for a short time when he was in yeshiva, he acted as a rabbi in some shul in Florida. And he would go, we would lay in the Torah, speak to the old people, to the older fellas there that give the herring. They're 95 and up. They're 95 and up.
Good try.
And one of them calls him over and shares with him, he says to him, you see these magnificent stained glass windows? You see them. You know who gave the funds for it? Who gave the funds? Bugsy Siegel. Bugsy Siegel came from an aliyah. I don't know if Lansky got an aliyah or Galila. And Sunday he would send his men out, right? He would give them a to-do. Bugsy would give them a to-do list. That Sunday, 10 a.m., shoot down long legs, Tuesday, the representative of Al Capone must be shot up and with his family. And at 12 o'clock, please make my donation to the shul and be sure to get a receipt. That was his, mafia. Why? Because religion was viewed as, Sunday you worship in church. So lahavdil, in our world, you go ahead and you serve in a shul. Mission accomplished. So this is a very dangerous portion. And therefore, the Ribono Shel Olam wants to remind us that there must be spirituality, and the real spirituality, before you go ahead and put something on the altar. Spirituality is compared to fire. Right? It works upwards. It's what we could do. The Borei Ma'orei Ha'esh, the blessing on fire, is not just on the physical fire. It's after we leave the Shabbos, we enter into a weekday. We are reminded that we could move upward. It's something very spiritual. Society's worshipped fire. We have an understanding of an appreciation, Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, that spirituality is fire. But fire on its own cannot exist without a fuel. And the fuel of our spirituality is a text. It's the Eitz Chaim. Remember the holy ark that contained the luchos? What was it made out of? It was made out of wood. But it was plated with gold. And some note that the wood is really the oral tradition. It's organic. It's alive. The oral tradition is alive. Every generation has to sense how we apply it to the new realities. right? You want to go ahead and figure out how to kasher a microwave, don't look in the Talmud. You have to have this organic structure known as the oral tradition to figure out how to apply it. But there are parameters. You can't go ahead and use the oral tradition to destroy rabbinic authorities, which they do make adjustments to Torah. You know, there's the concept of a prusbul, the heter iska, to go ahead and allow loans with interest. So it's a system that's alive, like the tree, like the eights, but at the same time there are parameters. There's the goal that contains it, because there must be structure. Now, in English we call this wood, and we call the tree a tree. In Hebrew, this is also made out of eights, because that's what it is. It's alive. So when I go ahead and bring an item to the altar, I need that reminder that you have to bring it, but it's not just to satisfy some force above and then move on and live your wonderful life ignoring everything. It must be a korban that is on the eish, on spirituality, connecting to the higher being. But how do you connect to the higher being? It has to be with al eitzim, on wood. There has to be something tangible, a live system, what we call Torah, what we call the oral tradition, because that is how you are a spiritual being. Now, we have clarity, I think, when we look at the verse over and over again. So let's return to page 546, or to chapter 1, verse 8. This children, the person stands there. He watches the Kohanim in their service. He is meditating and thinking, this is wonderful, now I can go back home and live my life. But he is reminded, remember one thing, that the way you achieve in this room, the way you achieve within this structure of the Bet HaMikdash, is when you bring an offering, but it's on fire, which is on wood. Keep that in mind, right? The fire, which is, the wood which is on the fire. Ala etzim asher ala esh. Why? Because that is how you utilize this Bet HaMikdash. Never walk away thinking that it's a mission accomplished. It's what you take, the values of Torah. This is what you do. So this is, of course, the structure. And there are many rabbinic statements of the warning that when you put wood on the altar, be sure that none of the wood is penetrating out of the altar. In other words, it has to be all on. Don't allow the wood. In other words, sometimes you can have a person who appreciates the intellectual brilliance of rabbinic tradition, but it doesn't bring it into the spiritual realm at all. In other words, there's a danger to just study Talmud and believe that it fascinates me, it's Judaic studies, but not bring it into your own spiritual world. So therefore, the wood has to be on the altar. Now, the wood doesn't always have to be there. We're not always studying. We are humans, but we are always spiritual, because when a person lives for the sake of heaven, there is always a spiritual fire within him. Even when I am on vacation, if I'm doing it because I want to strengthen myself and be happier and be sane, to be able to deal with the challenge of day-to-day life, so then it comes out that the fire is always there. Eish tamid tukal hamizbech. The fire is always on the altar, because we are a life. My life is an altar. The fire is always there. The wood, I try to find time to learn Torah every day, but the understanding is that the reality, we are living a life, but spirituality always exists. So that's, of course, the message of the book of Vayikra, the message of the Korbanot, in understanding. And there are so many statements that when you go ahead and you tune in, you realize that we are being reminded something there. These laws should not just be taken as dry laws, but understand that they are there to inspire us. The idea of not bringing leavened bread into the Bet HaMikdash. Figure out the message, not to bring honey. Also, there's a message there. So learn the text with an appreciation and understanding that every single statement is indeed to remind you of how to serve the Ribbon Shalom. So that's what we have here. And we'll keep that in mind as we continue through the section. Next week already I'm in Pesach mode. It's 8 days before, or 9 days before our Pesach, so we will not meet until after Pesach. So it's an opportunity to wish everyone here a Chag Kasher v'Sameach. Enjoy the Yontiv. Simchas Yontiv is the biggest mitzvah, so please do everything in your power to be happy and to enjoy the wonderful gift of a nice Yontiv. Thank you, everybody. Good day.